Welcome, everyone. This is episode 8 of Enough to Keep Going. So you may not remember me. I'm DBQ Hams. It's been a while since I've been here, but these gentlemen have been so kind to allow me to come back and talk to you. So I'm grateful to be back. Actually, I've been on the road, I've been working, I've been doing family vacation stuff, but the truth is I just can't get enough of gaming and talking about it with you. And because this is the Enough to Keep Going, I do have enough to keep going and to keep coming back and sharing those conversations and discussions with you. So Swiss, I've been gone for a while. How have Zeus and Prime been treating you? Have they been giving you the hard time as the new guy here, or have you been kind of slapping them around and letting them know there's a new sheriff in town?
I wouldn't go that far. They've been quite welcoming, except for I wore my my Captain Picard T-shirt the other day, and they accused me of nerding up the podcast. My wife though did mention when I shared the story with her, she did mention how I managed to nerd up a video game podcast with a bunch of working dads.
That is a really key point. I don't know, and this coming from the guy who corrected Zeus last month about the difference between amiibos and Skylanders. So I'm pretty sure this podcast was nerded up plenty before you got here. So I'm glad that you kept it going.
Well, I try to do my part.
So I will also say that my wife would have been very pleased with your Captain Picard T-shirt. Partly because it's Patrick Stewart and there's other, she has a long history with Patrick Stewart. But she also has a Patrick Stewart T-shirt, but it's actually just a Captain Picard Earl Grey tea T-shirt. So.
Oh, that sounds cool. We did get my daughter a Riker T-shirt that says "I'm number one." So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It's kind of. TNG is kind of the the family show. But.
So is this where we say make it so, and we'll keep going? And should we engage the rest of this podcast? So Zeus, have we nerded up this podcast enough for you, or are you ready to join us and break up our next generation love fest over here?
Yeah, we can go ahead and run with it. I got a few more social media things to do, but we should be in clear waters now.
Chances are Swiss and I could keep talking for a little while in terms of some other pieces here. So I think the big piece here tonight is, so this is our regular show. This is our Monday show. Granted, it's Tuesday. Don't ask why, but blame it on me because I'm back and late and delayed, and I spent way too long in airports and delays. So thank you, gentlemen, for making the show happen on another night so that I could be present, and I'm glad that all worked out. Our show tonight it's our topic show, and we've got a kind of a realistic topic here. I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to talk to you in a heartfelt way, because what we're going to be talking about is free games. We're going to be talking about the economic models of games. We're going to be talking about whether games should be crowdfunded. This topic could go on for quite a while, but I think there are a number of pieces here that might kind of provided the impetus for it. And one of them, for me, was reading this in my hotel room last week on the road, was about the 2K earnings call and how GTA Online now is listed separately than GTA 5, and that GTA Online trumped, or let's say surpassed, the earnings of GTA 5. And so I think that's a really key point of what those business models are. And I think another piece of it is, as we head into this fall, we've got the PS4 Pro, we're getting the Xbox One X. I have to slow down every time I say that still. And what those assets and resources and what game development looks like in a modern HD 4K era, and how much games cost. That the old business model of buy it once and ship it out in only pull from that consumer one time versus providing a number of different hooks. And then we also have some news stories the past week, right, with first single player games like the Shadow of War Mordor game that's going to have loot boxes in it, another way to continue to build in some revenue sources. And so we've got big AAA games that are looking for additional revenue, but we also have a lot of smaller indie games. The amount of users on Steam continues to skyrocket, and the amount of games that are available on Steam that have been crowdfunded and sourced, whether it's through Patreon or Kickstarter or GoFundMe or Fig. There's a lot of different options out there for developers who are looking to find support for niche games, for genres that may not be considered AAA anymore. And so all these factors come together in the idea of should games be free? Should games be something that we pay for as we consume them? Or should it be an upfront model? And so I think that's kind of how we'll kick this off. There's lots of directions that we can talk about this. I know that Swiss and Zeus both have some interesting concerns and some ideas in terms of the different directions and the positives and negatives. So we're going to move that, and we're going to move then into obviously our playlist and get out of here within our 45-minute or so time frame. So Zeus, before we nerd back up this podcast and Swiss and I talk about how there's a number of good crowdfunded and Kickstarter games that are next generation like in terms of Bridge Crew. Oh, wouldn't that be great? A Bridge Crew return, not the Bridge Crew, but what was the Starfleet Commander, the old PC game? Anyhow, I'm rambling. Somebody stop me here and tell me why games should or should not be free. Zeus, do you have some strong feelings about this? I know that we've talked about this on some other podcasts back before, but I think that the dynamics of the industry have continued to shift since that time.
Yeah, so I guess my big premise is, so things that you create in any format, in any realm, in any framework, are inherently guided and driven by the environmental factors in which you create them. So, I shot a short film once, and part of my big learning experience was that's a highly collaborative experience, and the way I had thought that the movie would turn out, just like you kind of read about in directors' commentaries, is different than how the movie actually turned out, because there were other people adding to that formula. Now, if I went off and I made a movie in isolation, that would be a thing. Our movies, the characteristics and parameters of our movie were heavily driven by the constraints on the equipment that we had, by schedules, and et cetera. And probably also heavily driven by the fact that the movie was unfunded. Obviously, when you have, and this is a conversation my wife and I frequently have, when she talks about whitewashing or Scarlett Johansson playing the character in Ghost in the Shell, and I talked to her about the butts and seats factor, right? That the way movies are made is you get a bunch of investors who come to a table and all agree to put a little bit of money in. That creates certain expectations and a certain dynamic around the director and the producer. And the model by which we finance movies definitely drives what they are. So I firmly believe that that's the case also in games. As we talked a few weeks ago, maybe last week, about how the gaming industry is kind of this immature model in comparison to movies and music. And so we benefit a little from being able to forecast the way we see things unfold. And maybe we ought to also be able to foresee the way things are going to turn out, given the way they went in movies and music. So my big thing is, we've, all three of us, right, as well as Prime, have grown up being accustomed to a certain game design in a certain way that the reward system is kind of parsed out, and the way that we have each come to individually feel how we enjoy a game or like a game based heavily on that characteristic. And the truth of the matter is that when a game is free, whether it's free to play with in-app purchases, whether it's a Kickstarter, crowdfunded, GoFundMe, Patreon, all these different models yield, in my mind, a different impact on the design language and the design narrative, the design interactive with the gamer, right? And in many cases, that dynamic is something I don't like. And so a big thing that incentivizes me, even on mobile, I tend to not download and install free games, right? Because I always know that there's going to be some sucker punch hidden in there with something tucked behind a paywall or a constant nagging system asking me to invest. And I'm like, look, I'm fine. Just put a price tag on the thing and just say, hey, this game's going to be $4.99 up front, right? Because I guess I don't mind the more honest transparency and would prefer that over you gaming the system, so to speak. I don't know. I mean, what are your guys' takes on that perspective?
So before, can I ask a question about what don't you like about it? Is it the preference of, you're waiting for that other shoe to drop of when you hit that kind of paywall, or is it a matter of perspective? So I think about our kids who are growing up in that era of there are plenty of free-to-play models, whether it's on mobile or even on consoles now. Is their tolerance for it different because it's what they're accustomed to? Is it a context? Is it a framework? Or is it a design element?
Yeah, it could definitely be a little bit of that, right? I mean, as people are more accustomed to the in-app model, then maybe it doesn't bother them as much. There are several things about it that bother me. One of them is
Sure. We're not the grammar police. Go ahead. Speak us all you wanted.
One of those factors is bothersome, right? It's administrivia, and being a guy who heavily, spends a lot of his time and time, with our YouTube channel and my blog investigating technology. I'm very conscious of this thing that we manage at work, right? That's called systems availability. And in my mind, what I call kind of time on task. Well, my time on task in a game is playing the game. You and I kind of talked a few weeks ago, last month, about these imaginary parts of the game that we build into this world in our own mind. And I don't mind that, but I don't mind my game time clock cycles like yours, like Swiss Guards, like Primes, are limited, right? I'm able to allocate a certain amount of time per week to the game. I just don't like the interrupt, right? I don't like this stream of fun sharply interrupted by this begging for money, right? And mostly I would just like to control that, right? Again, if I'm given the opportunity to just buy the full game, that's one thing. But a lot of these games are wired even tighter, where there is no one single way to pay a one-time fee and be done with the whole thing, right? There is no way to universally get rid of ads. There is no one thing that you can buy that unlocks the whole game, right? You have to buy 5 different things. So that's probably the main thing is this huge interrupt signal. But I also don't like the contrivances, right? Games that aren't free are heavily crafted around this notion of when am I gonna give the gamer that injection, that release of endorphins in their brain, right? How frequently am I going to do that? We talk about things like where your save points. We talk about the fact that in Destiny you cannot pause the game, right? All those things feed into that dynamic, and the supposedly free but for pay model, changes that in one way. And another thing, and I don't know if you guys have caught this because we're not in our news cycle yet, but then I guess Monolith, the developer who's probably under direction from Warner Brothers, is putting loot crates, right, that are for pay in Shadow of War, right? So there's another radical skew in a game that's supposed to be predominantly a single player experience. So DB, you asked me what was it that bugged me. Swiss, I know you've been chomping at the bit, so why don't you go ahead and then we can roll back around to DB.
Yeah, you basically touched on the points that I was going towards, which is a game should be an experience, and these games that are built around games aren't free. Okay, it takes time, it takes effort to develop it, and somebody's going to get paid. I mean, nobody's unless your model is living in your parents' basement eating ramen, it's going to cost money to make games. So the developer needs to make their money.
Unless you're a developer that's already super huge, and for some reason you're doing your game for free as a charity, that's the topic we wanted to get to.
I guess that could work, but I don't see that happening too often. But the point is that they have to get their money somehow. And so when you have this experience and then you have, well, we need to get paid interruptions, it shatters the experience, and that can be a detriment. What bothers me more about with Shadow of War, you have the loot crates. Okay, that's kind of annoying. But then there are games that basically just prey on people's addictions to endorphins, you can say. And the whole game is just built around, okay, I need this next piece. I need this next piece. I need this next piece. I need this next widget, the next shiny thing. And to me, there's not as much game in there. And I don't know if I'm a snob or if it's just, I find games like Clash of Clans distasteful in that regard. You get, large companies and they sign Kate Upton and Arnold Schwarzenegger and they just blast the airwaves with advertisements. And then they have this game that's really just, you need your next hit, basically. And to me, that's not a game. So I don't like the direction that these freemium models are taking. I can tolerate these loot crates a little bit because I saw an interesting article on Forbes where it was video games should be more expensive. And he was basically saying, you think back in the 90s, you want to go get an N64 cartridge, it was $60 or $70. And how much do games cost today? $60. You had everything else rise in price. AAA budgets are exploding, and yet we're still paying the same amount for a game. So games are cheaper for the consumer these days, and they need to recoup that money somewhere. And I guess there was some argument as to whether digital distribution and whatnot make games cheaper to produce, but on the whole, budgets are going up. So that's another kind of dynamic. They're trying to look. Publishers, I can understand, are trying to look for other avenues to increase that, because I don't know if consumers are willing to pay more for a game like they used to.
So just DB, before we get back to you, so the only thing I wanted to add kind of in the Swiss's mix is, so a big part of it is the when too, right? TV has commercials. How would we? But how? So in those commercials, there's a pre-roll, right, that prepares you for the fact that the show is coming through the close of a scene, and you're going to chop to a commercial, right? How would we feel if there wasn't that roll in, right? How would you feel if, like, because the music rises and then the scene kind of fades and then you cut to commercial? How would we feel if there was no transition, right? How would we feel if just snapped to commercial? And how would you feel if there were commercials in the middle of your movies, right? So if the game things were predictable, like if you got, like, at the end of a level it said blah, right, but it doesn't. It's a lot of times it happens at these weird times, or I don't know. Go ahead, DB.
No, I think this is really good. I wanted to bust in, could laugh, because you're describing watching a YouTube video nowadays, right? That unless somebody's deliberately cut it in a certain way, that splice could happen without the prep, or a streaming service. There are examples out there when you do get that hard cut moving to an ad. But I want to go back to what your question then, right? Is what happens if there's not that roll, that lead up? And I want to to question both of you guys on, and Swiss, you said this, that games are supposed to be an experience, and the lead up and the role to me makes sense if that game is trying to tell you a story or to weave you a narrative or to keep you in a world, right? What if that game is a multiplayer competitive game and it, cuts everybody off at a time, both sides, to do an ad, right? That is your commercial break. What if that game is a puzzle game, or that game is, that game is, not something that is dependent on investing you and sucking you into that world? And
well, I think that every game has a natural rhythm, right? So even if it's a competitive multiplayer game, you have, you start out, there's the competition, and there's a resolution to that competition. There's a goal in mind. And so you have these natural points where resolution takes place, even in a puzzle game like Tetris. Short of having an endless stream mode, you're going to have points at which, okay, you reward the player for achieving some sort of goal, and those would be natural fits for commercial cut-ins. I could understand and tolerate that. I don't understand. To me, it's laziness, just randomly, okay, everybody stop, blow the whistle, it's a commercial break,
Send all hate mail to SwissGuard at E2KG.
But I'm not advocating for commercial breaks. I understand that people got to get paid. So, but I think there would be natural spaces for it, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen. I'm hoping that downloadable content, where you can leverage the work that you've put into it, the lead up work prior, and it's just kind of creating new assets. Hopefully that work is cheaper and you can charge $20 or whatever, can help alleviate it. But, or, just in-game advertising. I wonder, would you guys mind having a Coca-Cola logo affixed to in the center of Street Fighter 4? Street Fighter 4 brought to you by Coca-Cola. Would that bother you? Because it wouldn't really infringe upon the gameplay. It would just be there.
That might be a topic.
That space out.
That might be a topic for a separate night, because I actually have no problem with product placement. It feels natural to me. Like if you walked into my computer lab right now, you would see this can of Monster Rehab, right? So did Monster pay me for the product? No, not really. But most people's places you walk into or stuff you see branding like that. So, but I don't know. So.
Monster Rehab. It's enough to keep going. So
this podcast brought to you by
Monster Rehab. Monster. Anyhow, but Monster, if you're listening, yes, please sponsor us. Thank you very much. I think that there are, and the models are showing this, that there are ways to do this without the commercial breaks. And I do want to come back at some point to that idea of product placement, because there was a movement at one point in time in the late 2000s where games were toying with that. But I think the example that Zeus referenced and I referenced at the beginning of this segment, that with Shadow of War having loot boxes, that loot box model, the cosmetic, the boosts have shown to be effective enough to keep that revenue stream going. That, in some ways, I think the interesting piece, and this may be another topic for another night, is what happens, like in GTA 5's case, when the revenue stream from those loot boxes and the cosmetics and the in-game currency and all the other pieces of the intangible make more money to the point of deterring a company from even putting out story-based DLC or DLC within that world, right? So I think that there's a there's a critical point at some point where we start to tip one way or the other. I think the other piece that there are models of this where it is really successful, or at least not successful, but both successful for the company and for the consumer. I think Titanfall 2 is a great example of that, right? Where they've put out and continue to put out maps. Just at the end of last month, they had the big Frontier Defense update, which is free for everybody, but they continue to bring in revenue from cosmetic pieces, or there are free games out there. We've talked about Paladins on this podcast, and some of those other, MOBAs and some of the first-person shooter competitive ones, or the new release on Xbox like Gigantic, where there are, it is a free-to-play model, but there are enough cosmetics or ways to buy characters that you want to play that it offsets that, initial development so that there's not an upfront cost.
But the weird thing to that, I'd still say, and this is going to be heavily present when Shadow of War releases, right? This is probably. I think at the end of the day, I'm with Swissguard, right? Where a very heavy part of this element is the game's not free, right? So you telling me that it's free and contriving all these ways to make me pay for it, but not really for it to be up in my face, feels very disingenuous, right? It feels like a con, and because you're going to pay for it one way or the other. You're either going to pay for it by having to sit through the ads, or you're going to pay for it by in-app purchases. Now, the one thing you mentioned, DB, where there's a game where there are some people playing for free and who don't participate in it at all, and there are some people who are buying stuff, and there are some people who are buying $800 worth of stuff, right? The part of that, to me, that I still don't like is, and you could definitely bypass it by not fixating on it, is that means what's really happening is some percentage of the some percentage of that gaming demographic is subsidizing the development of the game for others, and what is what does that feel like? So I don't know. The only way to make it democratize capitalistic meritocracy, I'm not sure exactly what kind of system that is, but some system that combines all elements of those three is just make people pay for the game. And I get it. I mean, I know people were trying to come up with new financial models, but at the end of the day, the impact for me is I'm not going to play 99% of the time. I'm not going to play a free game.
So I'm going to kick it back to Swiss for some final thoughts, and then I want to kick one more question to both of you before we finish this. So Swiss, do you have any other follow-ups on things that Zeus or I said in terms of other thoughts here?
Well, I thought it was interesting, Zeus mentioning subsidizing. Is it really subsidizing if the person is it just where one person is willing to pay more than another person? If you think about, how different is that than like a Steam sale, for example? If you and I both want game X and you're willing to pay $60 at launch, but I am only willing to pay $45, that's me attaching a value to what I feel the experience is. And, perhaps some people don't attach much of a value to the game other than it being an idle time waster, in which case they don't want to pay anything. And for another person, they may be willing to spend $60. I don't really think this analogy can really hold, because if somebody's spending $800 on a mobile app, I think they have issues, and they probably need to seek some sort of treatment. It's like a gambling addiction at that point.
So my only blip, and I'll try to do this in 2 seconds because I know DV's trying to move on. So my feeling is that the Steam use case that you mentioned is different because fiduciary accrual within the games industry is heavily time phased, and so the value add of $1 spent on a game in the launch window is valued differently than the people who buy it in the life cycle tail at the lower price. So I don't feel like that's so much subsidizing, but that's their revenue tail, which to me feels a little different. But yeah, but I had one other thing, but I'll let you go ahead. Sorry.
No, so I guess the wrap up question, and I think this is a conversation that we could, and we've already talked about this, where we could spin this out into multiple topics and continue this conversation. You know, a year ago at this time, I was starting a 4-month run playing Spider-Man Unlimited, the free mobile game, right? I mean, so I'm guilty of sinking some time into it, and eventually, over the course of 4 months, I put in maybe $28 into the entire game. But over 4 months, I feel like, yeah, that's, you know, there's a reasonable piece there. I think the subsidization or the hooking of a whale and the addiction aspect is probably the more concerning piece, where if somebody is deciding to pay for that and has found some value. But I think and we haven't even talked about other models of this. You know, there's the early beta, early access of games like Fortnite, where you can buy in, but it's going to be free play at some point in time. You know, there's lots of other conversations to have here. The question, though, before we took off into our playlist, is, with the success of this model, do we ever move back from it?
I mean, I don't know. I think part of that question is it successful, right? It's successful for some, but clearly it hasn't been so successful that the big players that, in my opinion, really drive the industry, you know, have wanted to really head that way. And there's definitely two forks to that, right? There's maybe a consideration of the big four who are driving the industry in terms of mass, right? Sheer center of mass and the financial gains, but definitely indies, some of which do a free-to-play model or something. That might be a curious thing to look at, because I don't really know that any of them do. But then there are some developers who are driving the art, right? And modulating to a certain extent maybe what a good game is. Now, again, as we talked about the last time we talked about indies, none of those are in my wheelhouse personally, but maybe they are for the future generation. And just before I let Greg close out, so the other comment I was going to make while Greg was talking is, so this whole conversation is, I've got 2 articles in my queue that I want to write. One of them is an article that kind of dusts this topic up again. That's, you know, I don't think games should be free. But then another question I have that I want to kind of explore in writing is this topic of loot crates, right? Or anything in a game where you pay money and what you get back is random. My question is why is that looked at as gambling? And could there be a push to make that illegal? Unless it's built and licensed and permitted in a very small window, like in certain states and with certain parameters built around it. Because I question, you know, if you ask me to pay $2 as an in-app purchase and what you give me back is something random, and I'm incentivized therefore to do that 5 times, that's not really different than playing on a crap table, right? Or playing roulette. So I'm sorry, and it's in a game, right? So, which is in this country, you know, games for a very long time were casino games, right? Before we got into video games. So, Greg, I'll let you go ahead and put a bow on this.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the random loot boxes, because I was in GameStop the other day, and a lot of times my kids like to gravitate towards little knickknacks packs, and those are all randomized. So you have like, oh, you know, get one of the, you know, Avengers, or one of the latest Nintendo characters for Mario Kart, whatever. You don't know who's in the package, and then you open it and it's like, my kid doesn't like that character, and then I just wasted $3. So yeah, it's happening in real life too. As far as whether we can ever turn back, I like when you mentioned the art, because I just feel like there's a tension between structuring your game's experience to allow these transactions, however they occur, and the actual gameplay experience. So, there's always I think the market's going to help drive people, keep things in balance. I don't think it's going to tip the scales, and we're never going to see, a game like Horizon Zero Dawn or Breath of the Wild where you pay all the money up front, and you might have some DLC packs, and everything's going to turn into, Clash of Clans or whatever. I think that I don't think it's going to be tolerated by the marketplace. So, I kind of hold out hope for that. Yeah, I don't care that those other games are out there, I guess, so much, because I'm still able to play the games that I play. I don't like those games. I wouldn't want people spending their money on them, but as long as it doesn't infringe upon my gameplay experiences, I guess people are free to do what they will.
So Switz, I'm gonna go ahead, finish up.
I was about to turn it over to Zeus for his playlist, so if you had a question, that's fine.
No.
You were about to get segue, DBQ. That's what those things that's been going on since Swiss came on the show. He'll sneak the segue in there right there before he rolls back to you. So you got to watch out.
Sneak it right in. No, go for it. Then I killed your segue at this point. So Zeus, you have pitched us like 3 different other potential topics, but we'll cover those on another show. Right now, obviously, Swiss wants to know, what have you been playing?
Yeah, and very stupidly, I actually closed our Flock chat room where I had the rundown, because now I've got to do my playlist from memory, which is never good. So surprisingly, as it often happens, like with racing games and other things, I've been on a kick. I'll just throw it out there to reveal a little bit about myself. I kind of take all the games I have on a given platform or on a given PC that I'm gaming on and throw them into a big randomizer and mostly play what comes out of that, unless I'm just in a specific mood. So I had wanted to record, do some Let's Plays of Digital Combat Simulator A10C Warthog, which is a big, huge flight sim. Just talk about somebody who's figured out their financial model, right? Because these guys got to be making money hands over fist. Because the game is free. Now, arguably, my own notion is being challenged. The game is free, and it comes with the Su-25, I think Frogfoot, which is a Russian craft, and the T-51T training aircraft that the U.S. Navy flies, which is really just the A-4 Skyhawk kitted out as a training aircraft. But then the way you put the simulator together is they have dozens, maybe up to 20-ish of individual plugins that you buy to build out your whole flight sim. It's a big survey sim, so you can kind of pick and choose what aircraft you want. So I think I have 2 of these plugins. I have Black Shark, which is I forget exactly what the aircraft is, but it's like a twin rotor helicopter. But I also have the A10, which I think at one point the game had the A10A, but you bought the A10C as a plugin, which heavily modernizes the craft. So I had a very difficult time getting into that game and figuring it out. I broke out my Thrustmaster T16000 flight control system, which is relatively new. I got rid of my old Cytec X52 flight control system, which had been a game I was particularly proud of when I bought it, but I bought it like 11 or 12 years ago, and it was just antiquated. So I was getting familiar with the flight control system, but it took me a long time to learn this game. And finally I had to hit the FAQ and some other websites, and it turns out I was trying to play in the kind of arcadey flight model with the arcadey avionics, and for whatever reason, the arcadey flight model kind of has a limiter on it, so which results in you the aircraft is actually more difficult to fly in the arcade kind of model. The simulation flight model is actually easier because it allows you to access the full thrust profile of the aircraft. So it's really weird. But one of the self-discoveries I made is that when I thought about it, my reality in flight sims is, for my whole time, has been I generally try and fly with a limited avionics set because I just don't need to have to go through some of the goofy machinations you have to go to like fire a missile. But I like to realize the reality of the flight model, because that challenges me in terms of my hand-to-eye coordination and physics and responding to the simulation model. So that's basically the way I'm playing A10. So once I figured things out, much like my struggles figuring out how to get my wheel and pedals configured for the last year or so, I had an awesome time. It felt like old days back in the early 2000s of me playing Falcon 4.0. And I've gone on and continued to focus on kind of playing with my flight control systems and the joysticks that I have. So I played that. Then I played some Dark Star 1. And that flight control system has both an independent stick and an independent throttle assembly. With Dark Star 1's an older game from 2006, doesn't recognize a throttle assembly, so I pulled that off. And then I went over to my secondary desktop, and I've been playing some Blazing Angels, Squadrons of World War II, which was an early game on the Xbox 360. I played a ton of multiplayer in that on the 360. We won't talk about this tonight, but here's a killer. It absolutely kills me. One of the big, huge things that I've been dealing with and finding interesting and frustrating on PCs the last couple of years is you have these really big graphical experience games, and frequently I go into them and they're not SLI enabled. And my primary desktop is fitted out with two GeForce GTX 1070s, so that's frustrating. It frustrates me then more if they are 4K enabled, because I'm like, why did you pack in 4K and then not allow me to use my two graphics cards, right, to really enjoy it? But it also frustrates me when they're not 4K, because then I'm like, well, I take the back. If they're not SLI enabled and they're not 4K, okay. But if you do one but not the other, then it's doubly frustrating. So amazingly, I was really surprised to find that Blazing Angels, which is a game from 2006, that was built for the 360, which was barely a 1080p console, has had 4K assets added to it. And the game really looks great. But it also caused me, I need to do some more testing. There's a lot of conventional wisdom out right now that says, if you're going to go 4K, like, you shouldn't bother going 4K if you're on a 1060, that you really need a 1080, and maybe you might be able to get by with a 1070. But Blazing Angels at 4K plays great on my 1060, so I got to pull the thread on that more. And I think there's one other. Yeah, so I think that's all I've been playing. Just a bunch of flight sims and space sims, and it's been really enjoyable. So, did either of you guys have comments, or Swiss, were you up and ready?
I was just gonna say, with the your SLI travails, it's like hashtag tech enthusiast problems. Yes,
definitely a first world problem. But it's like you've mentioned on the considerations of systems engineering and software engineering, right? It's frustrating, and then when you add to that DB's financial perspective, I'm like, why, right? Why? Well, Swiss. So an admission here, Swiss and I used to work together. So unfortunately for him, he probably sits here week after week and hears tons of things from me that he's had to listen to before. But my thing is, right, with code, right, if we're going to open up the hood, right, and pull the spark plugs, let's go ahead and do some other stuff we were planning on doing that's on our roadmap while we're in there, right? Because we're already likely to break something. So we may as well get 3 things done, right, rather than just one. And that's kind of my feeling. And I'm sure it's more complicated than that in terms of GPU optimization on the hardware abstraction layer side versus adding assets and setting up drivers to enable SLI. But from a gamer experience on the other end, I hope somebody gets how frustrating that is when 4K is sitting there and available, but you're not allowed to access it, even though you have 2 GPUs sitting in your rig, because you can't add the power of the GPUs that you have sitting there. So sorry.
That's like an excellent potential topic, which is the struggle between the artiste and the funder. So or in our case, the engineers and management. And I just so you know, Zeus, I do fall on your side. I know that you are, even though you were climbing the ladder. I know where your heart lay, So, the he, we, I have some stories, but anyway, um, this week I played some more Batman Arkham Asylum. I'm continuing the story. I won't get into that anymore. You've heard my thoughts. I've also played Borderlands 2 for the PC, and I just enjoy the game. And my brother he's not much of a gamer, but he enjoys games. So basically, when he plays video games, it's usually at my behest. And since we were kids, we like to play co-op. So originally it was couch co-op, and now it is online. So what I do is, and my brother's kind of a cheapskate, so what I do is find some good games on Steam and whatnot to pick up for both of us. And Borderlands 2, yeah, I think you get for like $5 if you hit it at the right time for a Steam sale. Great game, super fun, funny. They just did everything right. The story, it's entertaining to play. The gameplay is satisfying. I'm playing as a commando. I absolutely love throwing my why can't I think of the term now? My rig out in the middle of there and having it shoot missiles and a machine gun. My machine gun turret in the middle of a mob and have it tear some crap up. So
and I think I want to say back in the day on PS3, I think I had occasion to play with you and your brother on the first Borderlands, right?
We played a lot of Rainbow Six Vegas, I think, with you.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah.
So I think that was at that time that was the game. But yeah, so Borderlands 2 for a little bit, and I downloaded the Dreadnought Open Beta on PS4. So I know Zeus had like a profound experience when he played that game. I have kind of a more watered down experience. I'm finding that Zeus and I don't overlap as much as I thought we did on video games, but
are they in open beta now?
Now it is an open beta.
So this is an interesting thing because Lawbreakers, because Boss Key sent me email because I'd been part of the Lawbreakers alpha and then closed beta, and I love the game, but I know what the community's like, or what the gaming community is like around games like that. So I'm not rushing to jump in and buy the game. So later on, we should have a discussion about that, like how what's your emotional feeling about a game when you're there from the beginning and as it transitions, right? Because as we talked about gaming hipsters like a few weeks ago, right? Like there are lots of us who don't like things that other people like, so that might be part of the effect that if you're playing in the what's now an open beta.
Well, for me, it was just I got my notes here. First off, they made me register with Graybox Games, which I just want to play the game. But it didn't take that long. So I jumped in and I enjoyed myself. I mean, I'm glad I downloaded the beta and played it, but it didn't really, I don't think it's going to lead me to purchase it. And my biggest complaint is it might be coming at it with the wrong perspective. So is this a shooter or is it a strategy game? Because it felt for me like the pace was too slow to be a shooter. It's not arcadey. It ain't Ace Combat, but it's too fast in real time to be like a strategy game. So even in like Valkyria Chronicles, where you kind of have free reign of your movement, it's still turn-based. So I pick character A and I move them around. I get my position and I fire. This I'm kind of moving and it's all real time. But then it's sluggish. And I understand the reason they made it sluggish. It's because you're doing capital ships. I'm not flying an F-35. I'm on a Dreadnought. But I don't know. I guess my expectations were skewed. So maybe I just need some more time with it. I did enjoy playing it. As I'm going past the ship, I love swiping and maximizing my phasers, to use a Star Trek term, and start blasting my broadside and see the ship blow up. That's satisfying, but I just didn't feel good with the controls. So played a little of that, and then for various reasons, I found myself in a waiting room for several hours this week, and I knew I was going to be, so I brought my Switch and I played some Zelda Breath of the Wild. And first of all, so far I've only been really playing my Switch in docked mode, so playing it on the road was good. I enjoyed it in that configuration. Just left the Joy-Cons in like a tablet, and the screen is great. And I just continued to think Nintendo struck gold again. So, but Zelda Breath of the Wild, I absolutely love the fact that you kind of just wake up, you walk out, and you're in the world and you can start exploring. And I know the last few Zeldas, they've had some, feels like the tutorial mode has gotten longer and longer and longer. And this way, with the open world and the trying to leverage exploration, I think it really fosters that. I want to explore. I feel like everything's new and fresh, and I'm not being led around by narrative. So far, it's just. I think they've hit their design goals with that. Enjoy sneaking up. I like a little bit of Solid Snakes and Link. So that's all. Those are all good things. I need to put more time into it to really gain some detailed impressions. But my initial impressions have been it's fantastic.
Great. No, that's good. I just wanted to see if Zeus had any other follow-ups on the Dreadnought piece, since you guys had both played that. It's always interesting to see if a new patch brings in a different control piece, as you were talking about some of that, some of those concerns that you had there, Swiss.
Yeah. No, I don't, because we'd be here all night.
Well, that may be another time. Just sure. Like I'm sure we could all dive into, especially when Prime comes back, all dive into some conversations about Breath of the Wild, as we've all played it in different capacities and ways like that. So I, unfortunately, have not been playing a whole lot because I've been on the road. I have seen my kids, as Swiss talked about, playing the Switch in handheld mode. I've seen my family play through the Splatoon single-player campaign, and a variety of other pieces. But now that I'm back and unpacking my bags, I'll probably dive back in and have more to talk about on a future show. So since we are past our time, gentlemen, we have and we spent plenty of time on our old man soapbox in terms of what we think about the game design and free play and free to play design. I just want to give each of you a chance to see if there's any other final parting thoughts as we head out, and otherwise we'll wrap this Monday show up.
I'm going to cede my 1 minute to you, DB, because I have to live. I mean, part of the reason we do this is so that I can live the part of my gaming life where I don't get to play all the things you guys are playing vicariously through your lives, and I've got to hear at least 60 seconds about your gameplay in MLB The Show 17, a game which I have, but I have not been able to play since my initial purchase of the game.
Okay, so I have been playing it. I'll speed through this really quick. I've been playing it for the last 2 nights because I've been trying to decide. I picked it back up on a sale over Best Buy. Got it for like $15, right? So trying to figure out if I'm going to really stick with it or not. And over the last 2 nights, I did the Road to the Show mode. Trying to play. I've been playing some of the Diamond Dynasty, playing around with that in terms of, let's talk about free play packs and opening up blind packs of a virtual card. But the Road to the Show aspect has completely sucked me in, Zeus. It is. I am right back there with that conversation we had a couple weeks ago about creating our own narrative and our own storyline. So this is my pitcher that he's got a good fastball, not a whole lot of control, but he was getting up for the draft, debating if he was going to go to college. If he didn't get chosen right away in the first round, he was going to go to college, and he got picked up, number 10 pick in the first round. And so now I'm kind of inching my way through some minor league ball, and I started off just as a closer. and coming in the 8th, 9th, and now I'm coming in the 3rd and 4th innings, and as my stamina has grown, and the coach there on my team has seen my potential and has given me the chance to come in. I have not started a game yet, but he tells me I'm in the rotation for a starter job, so I'm going to keep pitching and keep making my case. Some games when they bring me in and my team is already, my starting pitcher has already given up 5 runs, I can shut the team out, but it's still not going to give us a chance to win necessarily. So I keep painting the corners, striking people out. So that has really hit that niche of being able to craft that narrative, and it does craft some narratives, but to do it as well within the game and within your head. So it's a great experience. And if you're a baseball fan at all and you haven't picked up MLB The Show, it's really impressive. Great. And now it continues to see some sales discounts. So as we get into the fall and into October, with playoffs, it's going to be something that is easy for other people to pick up at a discounted price as well.
Well, one could argue that this podcast is free to play, but I'll tell you right now, kids, I feel like the 1 minute I gave you was time well spent to hear that about MLB The Show 17.
Hey, DB, for your up and coming reliever, have you picked his intro music yet? So when he takes the mound for the first time in Tampa Bay or Boston, are you going to have like Enter Sandman blaring on the loudspeakers, or are you going to go with something a little bit more like jazzy and cool?
So you can actually do that. You can have, like celebration music, you can have your intro music, you can have, and it cycles through the different songs that are built in there, and you can choose where, what second point of that song that it starts and when it stops. So there is some really unique pieces, like if you want to get a certain riff, so no, I have not yet. I have not played around with it to that point. So, maybe next week when I come back onto the show, I'll have my own intro music, some Smashing Glass. I'll come in, and Prime can be the most electrifying man in the podcast business. And I'll shake up some Coors Light on them and keep it moving.
Awesome.
So, anyhow. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
My little
take
60
us
seconds.
Out here.
I would just say that this might be an interesting topic for another show. That is watching your family members play video games. And I don't know what it is, how my wife must be completely wired differently, but watching her play Dr. Luigi on the Wii U was one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. So, I think she loved watching me cringe. So I don't know if she was playing it poorly on purpose or if she's just that bad at it. But that's all we have, I guess.
All right. Well, I think it definitely can be another topic. We may have to protect the identities of our loved ones for the sake of our own safety, not necessarily for their safety. But gentlemen, I am so glad to be back with you. Thank you very much for adjusting schedules so that I can be here. The Swiss, it's been really great to start hearing your perspective, and I've been able to catch up on some of those shows that I've not been here on, and you guys have not missed me at all. So, Zeus, thank you again. And we may have nerded up the beginning of the podcast, but you and Swiss had some time there with your tech talk to nerd up the final bookend of the podcast as well. But that, what else would we be if we weren't a nerdy podcast? Because really, that's enough for us to keep going. So, gentlemen, thank you again. And until next time, good night.